Today I got a lot of very interesting topics to talk about today, starting with the FBI watch list and our southern border, the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, the recent AI Safety Summit, and lastly, I want to talk about the highlight of the week, which has to do with a Dr. Kal Tiala. She was a pioneer in so-called child gender affirming care. So I want to talk about that today. Now, first, what's going on? First things first, the FBI watch list. Over 160 people are over 160 people on the FBI terrorist watch list have been stopped at our southern border during this fiscal year 2023, and I have the article right here from NBC News. Now, NBC reports this year, U.S. border agents have encountered a growing number of individuals on the FBI terrorist watch list trying to enter the country via the southern border. Yada yada. As of July, 160 migrants whose identities match those on the terrorist screening dataset have been apprehended by Customs and Border Patrol agents trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border. Now, the Daily Wire also reported this within their news channel, the Daily Mail or something like that, whatever podcast they have for the news every morning. And I was listening to that, and that actually 160 total is more than we've had in the past 3 years combined, which is very concerning. I'll talk more about that here in a minute. Continuing on, NBC continues to report that the number of migrants from the Eastern Hemisphere more than doubled from 110,000 in the fiscal year 2022 to 228,000 so far in this fiscal year 2023. Quotes, the increase in encounters of individuals on the terror screening data set are largely commensurate of the increased flow to the border more broadly, a DHS official told reporters. Which, if we take a pause here just for a moment, the inclusion of that quote is almost like they're trying to explain something obvious or point out something very obvious. Because there's more people coming, there's going to be more potential terrorists coming. But yeah, exactly, which is why the many people on the right and people who lean right advocate so much for securing our borders, because with the more people that come, we don't know who these people are. They could be potential terrorists. They could have anti-American sentiments. We don't know anything about them. That's why we have a process for filtering out these people. Anyways, it continues on, quote, naturally, as we see more people arrive at the border from distant countries, we are more likely to see an increase in individuals who might be on the watch list or directly related to terror activity, which is just saying the quiet part out loud. They know having open borders leads to more potential terrorists coming into our country, and yet they do nothing about it. And by they, I mean those on the left, those in the Democratic leadership that are pro opening up the border, basically not having one at all, which has a whole host of issues that I'll also talk about here in a minute. Anyways, they also include this part here. Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat, California, who I know she was having controversy on her own. I think she might have passed away. Let me double check that real quick. Yeah, she passed away recently, September 29th. I believe she was having some health issues, similar to like that other governor who had a brain aneurysm. But that's besides the point. Moving on. In 2016, more than 1 million people were on the terrorist watch list. Historically, people on the watch list are far more likely to be stopped entering U.S. airports and crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. And the reason why I'm pointing this out, why I'm continuing to read through this article, is because while researching this a little bit, I was listening to the Daily Wire podcast that brought it up, which is where I got the idea initially, and I was browsing through some articles and I came across this one. And this one is, like I said earlier, just pointing at the wall and saying that's a wall versus actually providing some real journalistic insight or providing useful information. It kind of seems like they're trying to play off potential terrorists coming into our country as just, oh, that's just more people coming into, that's just because there's so many more immigrants coming into our country. Of course, more threats are potentially coming into our country, but they fail to acknowledge the fact that they're coming in illegally and we don't know what they're going to do. Um, Not good at all. And lastly, just this last part from the article, it says, quote, Americans are much more likely to die from illegal drug overdoses than terrorist attacks, the reporter noted. The center, or the CDC, data shows that more than 100,000 Americans have died from drug overdoses this last year, with more than 75 of those overdoses coming from fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. Exactly. I mean, is this supposed to make it seem like, oh, don't worry about terrorists and terrorist threats coming across your border. You should really be worried about drug overdoses and how big of a problem that is. Um, we are worried about drug overdoses and how big a problem it is. Many people are, and one of the reasons why we have such a big drug problem is because we don't secure our borders. And if we keep our borders open, you're just facilitating drug trafficking and promoting the illegal drug trade. I mean, overall, what I want to highlight when I'm talking about this is, first, we are inviting terrorists into our country, actively inviting them, incentivizing people to come over here because our borders are so fluid. And if you don't think they are, if you don't believe me that they are, and that hasn't gotten worse, just do a simple Google search. Just look it up. There's tons of videos and photos and information out there about how horrible our border security is right now that would show just parades of migrants coming toward the U.S. to cross into our border so they can claim asylum and get released and never show up for the court dates. It's really that simple. They know that it's really easy to come in here illegally, and so we're incentivizing a lot of terrible things, including terrorists or potential terrorist attack on America with everything that's going on with Israel and Palestine and all the other Arab countries out there promoting violence against the U.S. for supporting Israel and Jewish people. We have a substantial Jewish population here in the United States. If we don't secure our border, if we don't do something about this, we will be incentivizing and we will most likely have another attack on America. I wasn't alive for 9/11. Yes, I'm that young. I'm 21 years old. I wasn't alive for 9/11, and I would really like to think that I won't have to experience something like that again. Of course, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I cannot predict the future, but if I know, and I feel like it's common sense that if you incentivize things like this, incentivize coming into our country illegally, and knowing that you can get away with it, then you're inviting another attack like that on America again, and it's frankly irresponsible and ridiculous that we're doing this. Moreover, just some more lessons we're learning from this is that this is just yet another reason to secure our border. By keeping our border open, there's several problems that arise, like I said earlier, facilitating and promoting the illegal drug trade. Think about sex trafficking of adults and children. We're importing anti-American ideology into the United States. Believe it or not, surprise, surprise, there's other cultures out there who don't like America, and if they see a way for them to come in here and spread their anti-American ideology from within, they're going to do it. So, just another reason for us to secure our border. Additionally, we're fundamentally forfeiting our right to call ourselves a nation when we do this, because as a nation, you have to have clearly defined borders. You need to have a way to draw the line and say, this side is ours, that side is yours, this is what separates us from you. That way, we can define ourselves as a nation. If we don't have borders, if we don't have those lines drawn, then we're not able to call ourselves a nation. We're just a plot of land that people can pass through freely, which is not what we want. It causes a whole host of problems. um, and lastly, a lot of what I hear from those on the left or that are more liberal minded on this issue is that they tend to focus on the people who are struggling or in awful, terrible situations in Mexico or in other Latin American countries or Haiti that are coming across the border. The migrants are coming across the border, and they say, well, those people are fleeing a terrible situation and seeking a better life here. And I admit wholeheartedly that if I was in that situation and I saw the U.S. open like this, saw the U.S. open like this, then I would absolutely take me and my family across the border. If I saw an opportunity like that, yes. However, we need to remember a couple of things whenever we're thinking like this. First, we need to prioritize Americans. America is its own huge community, and Americans come first. So we need to remember that. So if importing a large amount of migrants illegally, without filtering them at all, which is what illegal border crossing is, what we're doing is going to ultimately, the impact of it is ultimately going to harm Americans, which we should be concerned about. Secondly, um, by not securing our border, by not securing our border, we don't know who these people are. We don't know if most people are like what many liberal-minded people imagine when they think of illegal migrants. We don't know if they're coming from off a situation and they're just looking for a better life here for them and their families. We don't know if they're in that situation, but they're being used by drug cartels to bring drugs like fentanyl and other other drugs into the U.S., smuggling other drugs into the U.S. Uh, to harm and kill Americans. It happens every day. We know this happens. It's been going on for decades now. So take away that. What I recommend is that we think about all the potential harms that are caused by people. Think about the analogy of America being your home and whether or not you want to lock that door. All right. If you own a home, if you own an apartment or wherever you live, you know that your home is where your family stays. It's your community. It's your small community. You lock your doors at night. That's for a reason. Would you just open that door up and welcome whoever you want in? Complete strangers? I mean, yeah, I admit probably like 7, 8 out of 10 times someone comes through that door, they're probably going to be okay. They're probably going to be a decent human being. But all it takes is those 1 to 3 other people to really mess up your life and really mess up your home and do awful things to you and your family. Now, the analogy applies to the US. All it takes is a handful of people with terrible intentions to come across and wreak havoc on a nation. So it's just that reason and all the other reasons I went over is just why we really need to secure a border. And we really, and I'm concerned about this, but we really should be more concerned about a potential attack on America in the future because we really need to be concerned about a potential terrorist attack on America because we are incentivizing it. We are promoting it right now. So just keep that in mind. All right, so moving on to something with a little bit more of a lighthearted connotation to it. We have a new Speaker of the House. His name is Mike Johnson. I didn't, I don't know much about him. This guy is completely out of left field. I never heard of this guy before. What I have heard, I've read about him and I've heard about him is that he's fairly openly Christian, which awesome, great, fairly conservative. And from what I saw, I just did some quick browsing. I looked up Mike Johnson to see what happened, and I saw several headlines on him from liberal media sources that were clearly biased. It's very clear that the left hates him, which is, in my opinion, a good sign. I mean, I saw some earlier talk about how he's like he represents like white evangelical Christians and how that's a bad thing. How his he has his plan to avoid the government shutdown is basically like a poison pill, because it's withdrawing aid or withdrawing funding from the IRS and things like that. Ultimately, painting him in a bad light, which, like I said, for me, whenever I look at far left on social media and they don't like somebody, it automatically I start to favor them a little bit, because I guess that, as that old saying goes, the any enemy of my enemy is my friend. But of course, it doesn't mean that he's a good guy or anything like that. I don't know anything. I'm just saying, I'm just admitting my bias up front. I also did see a video on the Matt Walsh podcast, Matt Walsh show, where he was saying a bunch of, Mike Johnson was saying a bunch of BLM talking points. Like, he was talking about structural racism and how he has two boys, and the one who's black is obviously more disadvantaged than the one who's white. So if you stand where I stand on that, just recognizing that there's no laws that are racist or discriminatory toward black people, especially, it just doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't since the 60s. Um, then you know that sounding like a BLM activist and calling yourself a conservative, or calling yourself Christian, or calling yourself Republican, very hypocritical. Just not, it just doesn't, it don't go together. It's like saying you like, it's like saying you're afraid of the dark and then walking through a dark hallway willingly just because you want to. I think you get the point what I'm trying to say here. It's just, a little bit of a red flag. I didn't like that. Um, However, he did say he promises to release the January 6th footage in its entirety, so we have the possibility of getting the entire story, just all the footage released. But Kevin McCarthy also promised that, and we still don't have it. So we'll see what Mike Johnson does. And like I said earlier, he pushed a budget plan that included Israel funding for Israel in the Israel-Palestine war, and it also included defunding the IRS, which great, sounds good to me. However, he might have to remove the defunding IRS uh, part of the budget plan, just so he can get it through, because obviously those in the Democratic Party do not want to defund the IRS. So we'll see what happens. Let's let's move on to the next topic, the AI safety summits that happened recently. I think it happened a couple days ago, maybe one, 2 days ago, I believe. I didn't watch it. I'll just be upfront about that. All this commentary is just coming from Elon Musk when I heard him on the Joe Rogan podcast, and reading things online on social media, just seeing clips and political cartoons about it. So just wanted to preface with that. I did hear it was largely countries just not really doing anything or showing real concern for the potential dangers of AI, because if you don't think there's real danger behind AI, trust me, you're wrong. There is absolutely great risk that comes with this amount of potential power that countries outside the US could develop and have, if they develop their AI programs enough. It could be awful for us. Anyways, Elon Musk and other tech leaders are very concerned about this. I know Elon talked about this on the Joe Rogan podcast. He especially noted something that I thought was very interesting. He talked about how Elon talked about how, and there's a certain amount of people in the elite, the kind of an anti-humanity coalition, people who don't like humanity, that like George Soros, like he's part of the Democratic leadership. He learned, and Elon talks about this. George Soros learned very quickly that if you pay the right people, if you put the right people in local positions of leadership, in localities like counties, DAs, things like that, then you can change how the laws are enforced. That way, you're kind of changing the laws without actually changing the laws. So when George Soros figured that out, you see places like San Francisco and Portland and places in Florida that, although DeSantis removed one of the George Soros DAs, that were just generating hellhole cities, just terrible crime-ridden cities, because people knew they could figured out they could commit crime, and the DAs wouldn't prosecute, and they just get a slap on the wrist. Anyways, back to AI. Elon was saying that people like George Soros and people like that, people who are anti-humanity, got a hold of this power of AI and got to program it, then they would automatically program anti-human values, anti-human philosophy into these AI super intelligence says, and what they'll do is release it out into the world, and then this AI will ultimately come to the conclusion that humanity is a plague, it's a virus, it's a cancer, it's a sickness that must be purged. And if we create something way smarter than us, and then we tell it that, hey, we're a problem, what's it going to do? It's going to solve the problem. It's going to eliminate it. I mean, I'm not saying it'll happen for sure. I don't want to get all doomsday apocalypse right now, but it's a possibility. The chances aren't zero, and it's something we should be concerned about. So I just really wanted to highlight that uh, in this final part of what is happening. Lastly, on this topic of AI, the Biden administration said that they want AI to, quote, be addressing algorithmic discrimination and ensuring AI advances equity, which is obviously terrible news. I mean, we're possibly dealing with something that could destroy humanity. And the Biden administration wants it to make sure it doesn't wants to make sure that AI addresses algorithmic discrimination and and advances equity. We're I'm just grateful more and more every day that term limits are limited to 4 years. But someone can do a lot of damage in 4 years, and this is 2023 we're talking about now. If he gets reelected in 2024, if he can even live that long, we could be in a whole world of trouble. You can cause a lot of harm to a country in 8 years. Okay. Segment highlight of the week has to do with a Dr. Kal Kaltiala. Yeah, a Dr. Kaltiala. She's a pioneer in so-called gender affirming care, and she wrote an op-ed speaking out against it. So I got the op-ed pulled out here. Just a little bit about Dr. Kaltiala. Her full name I can't even say. It's RIITT, so Rit Akertu, so Rit Akertu Katiala. She's 58, a Finnish born. This is in Finland, by the way. She's from Finland. And she's a trained adolescent psychiatrist, the chief psychiatrist of the Department of Adolescent Psychiatry at Finland's Tampere University Hospital, and yada yada. Moving on. In 2011, Dr. Kautiala was assigned a new responsibility. She was to oversee the establishment of gender identity service for minors, making her among the first physicians in the world to head a clinic devoted to the treatment of gender distressed young people. Since then, she has personally participated in the assessments of more than 500 such adolescents. So this isn't someone just out of nowhere that doesn't know what they're talking about. Just like no, this isn't just someone like me talking. Like she's had full firsthand experiences with this, pioneer in this atrocious field, and she's coming out and speaking out against it, which I guess credit where credit is due. So moving on from that, she later in the article, she writes, it's an op-ed article released in the Free Press. I highly recommend you read it in its entirety. She addresses many things that are very important. And if you're someone who's on the fence about this issue, if you're someone who disagrees with me about this issue, you really need to take a look at this and do some more research and look into this. I mean transgenderism, transgender ideology, gender affirming care, gender affirming surgeries, all this, and see the impact and the real impact it has on people, and what people who have gone through this have said about it afterward, from especially detransitioners. So reading more from the op-ed, the article, she wrote this in the Free Press, and the title is "Gender Affirming Care is Dangerous. I Know because I helped pioneer it." So if you're listening to this, please go take a look at that. This is an important quote I pulled from the article. It comments on the types of children vulnerable to this mind virus and the social contagion aspect that so many people on the left just deny wholeheartedly. So she says, and sorry, these are long quotes, but it's important that I read it in its entirety. So, quote, some came from families, children, with multiple psychological problems. Most of them had challenging early childhoods marked by developmental difficulties, such as extreme temper tantrums and social isolation. Many had academic troubles. It was common for them to have been bullied, but generally not regarding their gender presentation. In adolescence, they were lonely and withdrawn. Some were no longer in school, instead spending all their time alone in their room. They had depression and anxiety. Some of them had eating disorders. Many engaged in self-harm. A few had experienced psychotic episodes. Many, she emphasizes, were on the autism spectrum. Remarkably, few had expressed any gender dysphoria until their sudden announcement of it in adolescence. Sudden announcement. Now they were coming to us because their parents, usually just mothers, had been told by someone in an LGBT organization that gender identity was their child's real problem, or the child had seen something online about the benefits of transition. Now, this is exactly what people on the right have been saying for more. It's been more of a focus. It's become more popular to talk about now in recent years. But people like Matt Walsh, and people who had to who had concerns about this early on were saying we're talking about this for years, about the road we were on, the abuse of children that was happening, and here we go. We see right here the social contagion aspect of it, the types of children that are vulnerable to to this mind virus. I mean, we have people who are autistic, many of them autistic, many of them isolated, alone, experiencing depression, anxiety, a whole host of mental health issues, a whole host of problems that they were feeling internally inside, and just really vulnerable to being manipulated to manipulate it. Because if you're in that situation, it's not hard to imagine that someone in that situation would like to find a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning. And then they find out that there's this whole community of people out there who are also have a whole host of mental illnesses, probably also on the autism spectrum, and are exploring delusional these delusional ideas of gender, of saying that, oh, you're a man and you can get pregnant. Oh, you're a man, but you can be a woman. Oh, you're a woman, but you can really be a man. Oh, there's gender is fluid. It's a social construct. It's not something that's concrete. And if you're in the situation where you are not doing well in life, I'm sure the environment wasn't well, you're isolated, you're experiencing all these mental health issues, and you find out about this community, yeah, of course, you can, I can imagine, I'm sure we can all imagine that a person like that would latch onto these ideas and claim it as their identity. It's a social contagion aspect. It's a mind virus. It's the opposite of helping too. It makes things so much worse for them, which gets me to my second and last quote that I pulled out of the op-ed. So this next quote, it speaks on the truth behind so-called gender affirming hormonal treatments and the real impact that they have. Remember, this is coming from a doctor who did this, who performed these treatments on children. And just remember, other countries in Europe were ahead. I don't want to say ahead. They were doing these things to children before the U.S. were, and now we're receiving warning from doctors and people who transitioned in Europe, telling the U.S., telling people in the U.S. that we need to get off this path now, and we're right behind Europe, we're right behind Canada, we're right behind them on this path. We're following them. We're on a train. Europe And in Canada and other places like that are ahead on the train track, and we're just right behind it, and we need to get off because we're gonna fall into the same consequences that she's about to outline here. So, a reading from the op-ed. Soon after our hospital began offering hormonal interventions for these patients, we began to see that the miracle we had been promised was not happening. What we were seeing was just the opposite. The young people we were treating were not thriving. Instead, their lives were deteriorating. We thought, what is this? Because there wasn't a hint of in studies that this could happen. Sometimes the young people insisted that their lives had improved, that their lives had improved, and they were happier. But as a medical doctor, I could see that they were doing worse. They were withdrawing from all social activities. They were not making friends. They were not going to school. We continued to network with colleagues in different countries who said they were seeing the same thing. So, a lot to unpack here. Um, First, notice the comment she said on academia on this subject. There wasn't a hint of any of this in studies. It really says a lot about our academia's status right now, especially in the realm of psychology. And I mean, I think it's all tainted, but it's especially bad in psychology. And it's something something I can attest to, being a college student, having to read these a lot of studies that my professors assigned me, and just being exposed to a high volume of clear bias, blatant bias, clear manipulation of the data because they get to include extra things because of how they define the words, the terms that they're using. It's very easy to manipulate data. It's become common practice. I mean, just think about big pharma. Why do people hate big pharma so much? Because there's been several occurrences, public knowledge that we know of big pharma manipulating studies so they get the outcome that they want, so that they can pass this drug through the FDA and then sell it, make billions and billions of dollars, and then yeah, if people die, they don't care. They pay out a lawsuit, or they get sued, they pay out a lawsuit of like $5 billion, but they made $10 billion off the drug, so they made $5 billion ultimately. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Another example I have from personal experience was in a recent class. I was reading this article that not the teacher or the professor didn't assign it, but it was a group project, and the group assigned this article for us to read, and it was um, it was a medical paper that was talking about misinformation, this came out in 2022, mind you, and it was calling it used the China lab leak theory as misinformation, as something that had no evidence. It said no credible evidence of this existing. And my first thought was, in 2022, this this had the audacity to say that there was no credible evidence for a lab leak theory, even though we had doctors at the time who were being censored saying that it had the genetic makeup, or it had signs and characteristics that it was that COVID was designed in a lab, that was looked like it was made in a lab. Also, Wuhan, the place where it had the outbreak, had a coronavirus lab literally in the same freaking city where they're doing they're doing experiments with coronaviruses. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to say, hey, maybe it came from there. No credible evidence, right? And thirdly, 2022, we already knew this was a likely possibility. I mean, it's one thing if they said this in like 2019 when it just happened, but 2022, there was just no excuse for that. My point with this overall, me bringing up that example, it's just academia is in a terrible state right now. It's so hard to trust studies, and I wish we could trust studies. It would be great if we could just trust studies and let the experts do the thing, because that's what they're supposed to do, and it'll make researching so much easier. But you can't anymore. It's so hard to discern and filter through what's true and what's not true in today's so-called information age. Lastly, I just have three overall lessons that I want to draw from this article. So first, so-called child gender affirming care, especially in children, it's just child abuse. Call it what it is. It's child abuse. Um, they use drugs like these puberty blockers that like Lupron that chemically castrates children. And they set them on this assembly line that leads them to eventually getting surgeries that just butchers them, cuts off their perfectly healthy breast, cuts off their genitalia, makes a fake genitalia that has so many complications, and it's awful. If you don't believe me in this, listen to the detransitioners, listen to the people who went through this firsthand, and are courageous enough to talk about it. It's awful what they're doing to these people. Not just, I mean, right now I'm talking about children. I want to focus on children because I think that's something we can all get behind first. But adults too. We shouldn't be doing this to anyone. Doctors should not be allowed to do this to people. But focusing back on children, we're butchering them, we're castrating them, we're ruining their mental health even more. What we and the reason why many times why this occurs, why this is happening, is because mothers, and as she said in the article, but I already knew, the reason why these children are being exposed to this is because oftentimes it's mothers taking their girls or boys to these facilities and abusing their children by giving them these puberty blockers, by giving them these treatments, all to fulfill their selfish desire. Also, they can flaunt around their kid like a trophy, like, look, I'm inclusive. Oh, my kid's transgender. It's ridiculous, and they should go to jail. Absolutely need jail time. It's child abuse. It's horrible what they're doing to these children, and that can't be overstated. That's not an overstatement. Okay, and I think most people agree with this. I mean, I was listening to the Daily Wire news podcast recently, and they're talking about a poll that showed that most Americans, at least, agree that this shouldn't be pushed on children. And the fact that this is even a debate is ridiculous to me. So do whatever you can. If you agree with me, push the message. If you don't agree with me or you're on the fence, just look inside and ask yourself the question: is it okay? Is it really okay for a child, or is it possible, rather, for a child to consent to these things, to consent to changing their gender? If they can't, but if you disagree with me on this, you think you can. Even if you think that you can change your gender, which you can't, but let's say you could, in this imaginary world, you could. You think a child can consent to that? They can't consent to sex. They can't consent to buying alcohol. They can't own a firearm. They can't buy a lotto ticket. They can't drink a beer. I mean, there's so much that children can't do because they're children and they need guidance, and they're not old enough, they're not mature enough yet to make these decisions. They don't understand the life altering consequences behind these treatments, behind puberty blockers, behind these Frankenstein like surgeries. It makes them infertile. They can't have kids because of this a lot of times. They have terrible symptoms that last decades, the rest of their lives. It shortens their lifespan in many accounts. And if you don't believe me, like I said, go listen to the people online, on YouTube, on Instagram, on online. They'll tell you that these detransitioners, they'll tell you what the process is like, what happened to them exactly, and the terrible side effects they live through every day, even though they're detransitioning. It's just awful. The last thing I want to say on this is that the true solution, the true way to help these children who are confused, are lost, is to counsel them to accept who they are. If they were born a woman, they're a woman. If they were born a man, they're a man. It's as simple as that. And yeah, children, when they go through puberty, when they get exposed to these different ideas, they get confused, they get lost. It happens. It's fine. We all have gone through something like that growing up. We might be going through it right now. But when it comes to something like this, it's extremely important that we guide them back to truth. We guide them to accept them for who they are. It's wonderful if you're born a man, it's wonderful to be a man. If you're born a woman, it's wonderful to be a woman. You may be a little bit more masculine of a woman. Maybe you like to, I don't know, BMX bike or and climb trees and do things that traditionally men like. Okay, that's fine. You're still a woman. You're just a little bit more masculine in your characteristics. And maybe you're a man, and maybe you're a man and you like to play with dolls, or you like the color pink, or something else, or you like to do something that's more traditionally for women, like ballet, something like that. That's fine. Yeah, sure you have some more feminine features, and you're probably gonna get made fun of for it, but that's fine. You're still a man. Ultimately, you're still biologically a man, and that's something that shouldn't even be a debate. And yet, our society has deteriorated so much that we have to say that. The fact that our our societal culture is in this status right now, is in this state, is it's disheartening sometimes. But there's hope. There is a way out of this. We just have to take it. We just have to guide people, children especially, them on a path to accept themselves for who they are, and ultimately I think we can dig ourselves out of this hole. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and God bless.